not tonight.
Yes.
Every other night. You've got plenty of better things to do.
Yes.
Yeah, there we are. I knew it was true. I don't know. All these people. Well, don't worry. It won't last long.
Oh, you mean are we going to put out?
Where you go? 5 minutes? That's enough, isn't it?
5 minutes, after one of you probably.
You know what's under here, you know what's under here, don't you?
Where?
A well.
You're joking.
You told me.
We do have a wishing well.
There's a wishing well there, you know that? There's a wishing well, yeah. At a crucial moment in the middle of a reading, all this parts and the fountain comes up.
Flames come out of the water.
Flames come out. I didn't see it.
It's
It's true.
My uncle's from
Yeah, like, it's a hint to the poet, you know, for Christ's sake,
India. I've
stop,
got
you know.
relationship.
Really?
Now, you should buy this. This is a selected
They're from
poem.
India, from
Yeah, I don't
Punjab.
think he has it.
Oh, yeah, well, you look.
I've been there. I've been to, not to Rajasthan.
That's right. This is the new book.
Yes. Also to
Peace
Benares.
Project. You're a bit lucky.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
have time to...
Well, I only one copy.
Dan Moore.
Brief novel. Yeah, very brief.
novel.
Yeah, very brief novel.
No short novels.
No, just brief. I mean, it means shorter than short.
Shorter.
I haven't got time to read all that long stuff.
Good lunch. Really good, Professor Ruberol.
What?
Professor Ruberol gave us a wonderful lunch.
You recovered from your lunch? Hey? You recovered from your lunch? Or... Yeah.
It's really a good place, isn't it?
Well, at least he didn't have that cake, which was made of egg and cardboard, too. I don't know.
So how many pictures?
You didn't have it, a cardboard.
Oh, I've taken 23.
And all of
No. I've worked out the reading. Yeah.
for yourself?
I've worked it all out.
Oh, yeah, it's for myself, for Eric, and one
Recite.
I don't have those here. Not if I have
I got enough trouble remembering my name, little end of the time.
No, sure.
I hope everybody here knows the first book where they
Yeah,
shout.
Well, what is it?
What?
This was blood on.
Of the Nash Ambassador. Yeah, isn't that a great title?
Sorry?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you.
Writing it? No.
I don't know they've had it here. Oh, no people. Yeah, it's published by, it's all right. It really is
Madame
published.
Flora.
It's quite exciting, actually.
So if you go with it's yours.
Well, I think they looked in and decided no.
Yeah.
This is not for sale. No.
It's not for
No,
sale.
it's standing up at the end. You're going to be comfortable there?
It's very nice. I like it. I mean, which one's
Yeah, he knows.
it's 8:20.
Did you want to begin and get rid of it all?
Up to George.
Yeah. Just give a signal, George.
Okay, let's begin.
Okay, fine. Do you want me to stand up, read? Do I stand up and read?
Stand up, yes.
We have a platform if you want. Stand on there.
Can I just use this as a table? Thank you very much. As long as the well doesn't I need those books actually. Great.
Let me say a few words before you read.
Oh my God. I mean, how nice.
Actually,
All right, then.
almost everybody here knows who Eric Mottram is. He's been introduced several times and badly introduced by me, misinformed too, and he's quite wild about it. Anyway, the thing I want to add is that he's been a poet, but also an editor of poetry, and this is a very important thing because the National Book Centre in England was actually taken over by Eric and his renegade poets, the like of the marginal poets, and it was a veritable Armageddon, and they held center stage for about 5 years actually, and he brought out 22 issues of the Poetry Review, which is the establishment's poetry magazine, if you want to. And I think this is a great achievement because he was able to publish, not himself of course, he never published himself in this Poetry Review, he was able to publish all the poets that the capitalist publishers or the so-called establishment publishers refused to publish. And this success in his editorship has been collected in New British Poetry. New British Poetry is a collection brought out, edited by 4 editors, and he was one of the 4 editors. And the poetry that he introduced in this New British Poetry was the poetry that he selected in Poetry Review. And so he entitled this section, A Treacherous Assault on British Poetry. From that you can imagine what he means by his experience as an editor of the Poetry Review. This is all that I wanted to add. After all, you know who he is. He's a very famous teacher. That's, I think, his greatest achievement also. For 40 years, he's been teaching in Singapore, in Zurich, in Groningen, in London, in Kent State University in Ohio, New York University in Buffalo. He has lectured in University of Alcalá de Henares in Madrid. He has lectured in Hyderabad, and 3 universities in Hyderabad, Osmania University and also the Hyderabad University. He has lectured in Budapest, where he is in fact partly responsible for the revolution. Don't tell anybody.
I should be so lucky.
And they're giving him an invite now, but as a distinguished ex-revolutionary. And what I want to say is that he has been teaching for 40 years, and he's just about to retire.
Oh,
He hopes. And the fact that he's retiring is not really going to be news, because even after retiring, he's going to teach and lecture all over the world. He's already worked out a big program jammed with lectures and invitations all over the world. And one very important thing is this, that his influence is such that although he's not, although he's been holding center stage, if you want to, for a while, since '83 as the professor of English and American Literature at London University, he has influenced through his students a vast number of people in the world. And this is a great thing, because he's become a cult figure in promoting especially the kind of stuff, the kind of writing, which has been neglected for a long time, especially by the so-called publishers I mentioned earlier on. And this is very important because his students have taught others as well. And some of his students, I know some, who have already retired, but he's still there teaching.
Lucky them.
So you can imagine that Eric's achievement is not just limited to the poetry he has written or the editorship of poetry, nor of the criticism, because as a critic, he was in charge of the American pages, or the American book pages, in the Times Literary Supplement from 1960 to 1968. And this is a great achievement because these articles are unsigned, because nobody really knows that it was he who wrote all these criticisms on American literature and culture. And I must say that this is really a great achievement for anybody to write without a byline. And finally, he has become, which is known, he's most interested now in cultural studies. And this is what he's promoting, because it's something new, and people are not aware of exactly the limits and the benefits that can come out of this sort of a cultural studies in university as a university subject. And I think he's largely responsible in introducing the subject, and he's, for his own personal, he has a personal attachment to this kind of thing, where he realizes that law and justice, which he gave a lecture this morning, and I know that everybody with Professor Oberol appreciated this lecture very much, because it was something very new, absolutely new, and he has therefore created what we would call interdisciplinary studies, where he has introduced law as an aspect of literature, because he finds that nobody can really keep away from what law is, and law that controls us. The word is control. I wouldn't want to go into it any further. I give you Eric Mottram for the first time. He's going to read his poetry here in Paris.
Thank you. It's all true what he's saying.
Thank you.
Except that, like the sort of death wish around some people about that. Now, that microphone is there. You prefer me to what?
To speak into the microphone.
Can I put it just there? Is that all right? Then I can, how about if I just all sit here with my oh my God, it's soft.
Do you want a chair?
Is that all right? Can I just lean against this? Is that all right?
Do you want a chair?
George? No, this is fine. Great. Thank you very much for that. Very generous and quite true.
You're buying me.
Brilliant.
You're buying me dinner anyway.
No, I'm not. Well, you said you'd be going to an Indian place, and that's your lookout. Okay, to be serious a minute, I feel very proud to read here, and thank you very much for the invitation. And of all places in Paris, this is the place where anybody would like to read, would want to read too. What I'm going to do is, without fussing about dates and the names of books, I'm going to read from this selected poems which came out last year. And it's a nice handy book.
Advertisements are not allowed in this place.
Well, they better be, because I want everybody to buy this. I'll sign it, and then you can sell it for vast sums of money when I'm dead. And that's what booksellers do, isn't it, after all? Not you, of course, though. You're honest in that way. But, and also I've chosen poems which, and I don't mean to be insulting, which I do hope are not too complicated for anybody here whose English is not too grand. I think it's only fair to do that. And I please understand I say that as generously as I can. But there will be a chronological order, in fact, because the poems that I'm going to read first will be ones I wrote first, long time, well, in 1970. I have to say, by the way, that I'm a very late starter on all this. And the first book of poems I published was 1973. It was a very strange feeling that suddenly, yeah, I thought, yes, I want to do that. And there I am now in old age with a selected poems, which is actually hilarious. This poem is, I was fascinated by certain things to do with ceremonies in ancient Crete, that you don't kill the bull like they do in Spain. You know, they sort of shove a thing down between its eyes, a rapier, but they dance on its back. I thought that was much more healthy and more humane. So this is appreciation of that. It's called Crete, just. Bears, wolves, boars, wild cattle roamed into myths, oak, pine, cypress, made boats, stripped hills above springs, Egyptian skills, Asian heaven charts, murex dyes, surplus for export, gold, silver, obsidian, marble came to the island. A boy or monkey gathers saffron among crocuses, unsurpassed plumbing, and drainage in Guvnia's Phateos Malaya. Land and sea divide in frescoes. Islanders' eyes moved and spaced their memories, patches and bands of red, pink, orange, yellow, blue, unlike nature, and combined plants, unlike plants. A young man and two girls in violent action. Is she holding the bull's charging horns? Is the other poised to support his mid-air leap from the bull's back in praise of movement, effortless movement, terminating alert vigor? No fear of sky anger or tree vengeance. Their snake woman protects each house against wild and natural, so words survive. Cypress, cherry, chestnut, narcissus, hyacinth, thalassa, the sea, a composition they painted. Men brown, women fair, a dead man stands before his tomb composed. This one is written a bit later, and it's called Trains. That is, railway trains. I was fascinated by, when I traveled around Europe by train a lot when I was much younger, where the train would stop and you look out of the window and there's something you've never seen before. And there was this tremendous urge to get out, even though it wasn't your destination, just to explore that. And once or twice I actually did. I haven't got the courage now. But it was a wonderful feeling of just getting out of the train, you know, and saying, to hell with the ticket. Things like that. Trains. Through unknown towns, strange walls of familiar brick design, transported porches, porticos, rosed parterres, tub begonias. Upholstery, heat, the doors slide to 1948. Vienna, Innsbruck, the Allies' guards. Drunk to leave high peaks, snow crystals in my eyes. Drunk by the Gasthof, by iron cemetery mists. A closed train with 3 New Zealand women, tea drinkers, who knitted all night. my head radiant with chrysanthemums, through the Schwarzwald honey pines each night, sweep of their night grasp on dormitory windows. Morn hung mists across high, tight valleys, Strasbourg, Mulhouse, Lille, aging, first perceived, on the move, closed carriages sealed for high speeds. The Tokyo-Osaka Express, and neat food in thin deal compartments, licorice brown seaweed, snow-white raw fish between bamboo slivers, careful decks of fish, wildflower birds sing in hot silence, purple loosestrife, marguerites, striped caterpillars seethe over St. John's Wort. You leapt out to smell dark pink wild roses, steep and profuse. Oat fields begin to rush past this frame. This is a couple of sessions from a collection of poems that came out called A Faithful Private. I came across a quotation from a German poet, I'm sure everybody knows of, called Heinrich Heine. I was absolutely fascinated by this, and I thought it was so right. He said, I'm just translating this from German, so forgive that. A poet should have on his coffin not a wreath, but a gun, to show that he was a faithful private in the liberation struggles of humanity. I don't think I should put it there, really. I never got that far, but I thought it was marvelous. I feel very strongly about that. So I thought, okay, I want to write some committed poems, political ones, just a handful. So here's a couple of these. Number one, they don't have titles, it's just, I think there were 6 sections. Yes, there were. Also the sense that I've always respected when I've been frightened and scared. You know, I don't think one should ignore that there's certain times in your life that you shouldn't forget that you've been terrified and scared and really frightened. Of being scared, we never had it in the palm of our hand. Time tells who fell, who left behind. 200-mile storm front, eastward white behind grey in the north-south skies. Whether any man chooses, any of us are chosen, does writing it make a difference? Brother in liberty, a space of flame between us, rising in the serpent mounds, wordless songs, text writes. Miners ascend as machines descend to clear the air for humus minds, where sun blasts steady and animate. Who is this man from abroad to tell us we are part of disaster? Against the freedom trail, he urges us not to be victim. Outside, a bare tree, a cardinal opens to sky, windswept and jutting rain. Through analysis, through committed tones, a century's wreckage piles rooms, shores, sagging streets, mocking the trail. We are not a moment of your insanity. The second poem in this book. Blood of old newsreels, movies, smeared into induction rooms, the tribal. But holding the gift robe, called invitation, I can then go through. Say, stars overhead, without looming. Sit at a round table on the top floor to the stars. Open and surround models in their imitation. Leave the calcified dead. Move through and on to eat new branches. Through ear chambers hear a scene of colored smells. Taste spring, morning, bird songs. Find this writing under spell. Having eaten the old woman, she came out through his skin, changed his pigment, pores, and follicles in a mask of nutriment. Old goddess, new man, fountain. This is a poem that was read in translation earlier today by the gent here. But I hope you'll forgive me if I read it now.
In English.
In English, yes. No, that was rude. But,
That was strongly.
yeah, but I just thought that it was very nice of you to read that, but I had planned to read it. I wrote this a book of elegies. Now, an elegy usually suggests that you're writing some kind of mourning lamentation for the dead. In actual fact, I discovered that for the Greeks, the idea of elegy was much more celebration. And I was sort of intrigued by that. And I wanted to write a book of celebrations of people I really admired. I mean, all sorts of people, like jazz players and poets and writers and painters. And I had a really good time doing this. And the one that you read was on a French painter that I admire intensely, not only for his paintings, but his politics, which was socialist. And that was Gustave Courbet. So this was the 8th elegy in this book of elegies celebrating him. When it says I, it is not me speaking, it is Courbet. I wanted it to be in the poem, like speaking inside the poem. So they're actual quotations from his words. I like doing that very much. I like using other people's words and language inside. And it's quite distinguished because it's printed in italics, so there's no question of me stealing or anything like that kind. It's like somehow inside the poem having a discussion, you know, having a statement by somebody else, but quite freely. I don't see why not.
Before you read it, could you know, the epigraph that you had there, translated into Heinrich Heine, in the original Faithful Private, it's casket instead of coffin. Why is that?
Because casket is a coffin. It's a funeral term. It's a funeral term. Okay. Oh, and I was very fascinated by the way he used white. He has marvelous things where he's one of the first painters that paints with white, and he puts it on with a knife. It's extraordinary. I didn't realize that. It's really extraordinary. So this is Elegy 8 in the book called Elegies, Courbet. White open works lie in the days. The worktop is black. Green ivies, pelargonium, ferns, tragosanthus, these are obviously names of plants, inch their work and days. Courbet's black canvas, a place where light could be laid with a knife to make a wave crest, break arrested. Weight forms at the crest. Nature without sun is also dark and black. And then Courbet's voice. I do as the light does, illuminate the parts that project. In a full knowledge of tradition, to discover a reasoned and independent consciousness of my own individuality. I put a white vase on a white cloth, all the difficulties, white on white, and on the 50th, I got it. Look at the shadow on snow, how blue it is. I am seeing too clearly. I must put out my eye. In this socialist century, men look without seeing. Their minds on business. Your mothers did not hide you under the house from soldiers. The pigs try to devour democratic art. I will devour them, despite the renegades, the demented herds. Now I conclude it with my own voice. So that muscles force the backbone, to bend from mind under labor, to glean in deft handwriting before the levels of horizon. We had a wonderful exhibition of Courbet at the Royal Academy in London, and it really shattered me. One of my first jobs was at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. I was lecturer there. I was terribly in love. It was grim. That sort of thing. Quite appalling. And this is 1953, so you can imagine how aged I am now, a little senile shake and all that. But the No, I don't think so. Was it?
Yes,
The Years of Pilgrimage?
by Kobe.
No, this is another one, not the Kirby one. This is called The Years of Pilgrimage, and it is an appalling. I think one of the things to do about scenes like that, which didn't come to anything, as they say, is to record them as honestly as one can. But I really had, it was a wonderful experience. It also deals with, I don't know whether you've been to a place in Switzerland called Schaffhausen, in the north, where you can actually dive into the River Rhine. You shouldn't. It's going very fast, and you're warned not to, you see. And then it gets more and more narrow as it goes under a bridge, and everybody on the bridge cheers you as you're whizzed through in this current. And when you come out on the other side of the bridge, you can hear the waterfalls of the Rhine. So you swim like grim death for the shore. Well, I was insane then. I'm just crazy now, I guess. But that's what it's about, with these girls and men waving from the parapet, you know. So spring 1953, Years of Pilgrimage. That is a joke at the expense of Liszt, who wrote those marvelous pieces of music called L'année de pèlerinage. I thought, well, I can do that too, you know. These are little short verses, so that's where the pauses come pretty quick. Another relaxation, climbing into summer, branches of our own cherry tree, with wine and air-cured meat to make us tender again. We relaxed by plunging into the new Rhine, the motions of crawl, carried in currents, skeins of a sped river, until falls roared in our ears. We relaxed as water converged between piers. Girls and men waved from a high parapet as we were lunged through and then crawled for life, the foaming bank. Later we ate from baskets of cherries, red on your red lips. That was the spring. Your short laugh, your sandy hair bound up from nape, and the spring. Once a week, a talk on a high balcony above Zurich, of therapy with a pupil of Jung, relaxed after war and study, waiting to sail east, where we relaxed in nocturne, irrecoverable of seawater, black under moonless black, our naked skins alive with shining plankton, which lit ocean and poured from shoulders down our breasts to our sex, into wandering darkness, deep to fixed corals, white where light has sunk. You swim to recover, deeper than breath can hold. Indeed, yes. This is Elegy 15. I expect everybody here has heard of the great Chilean poet called Pablo Neruda. He came to London to my college, King's College, and gave a fantastic reading. And I'm ashamed to say I'd never really looked at his poetry, and it was quite extraordinary, quite amazing. Then I started to read heavily, and I followed his life, no end. And this is an appreciation. I was astonished to find out how much appreciation Neruda had with many, many people in his own country, that when he was preparing to be, hoping to be elected to the government, and even to be president, that all sorts of people turned up to hear his election speeches, and what they wanted to hear was his poems, and they knew them by heart. Well, I mean, how many countries do you get that? That really, that affected me a lot, that sense he was that good. So this is a poem called, this is one of the elegies of, and it's just called Elegy, now what is the number, sorry, 15, Neruda. Oh, at the end, there's a quotation some of you think I might have stolen, from American poet called William Carlos Williams. His name, by the way, Neruda, wasn't his own name. It was the name on the cover of his first poems, and it's the name of a Czech poet. Apparently there's a statue in Prague to a Czech poet called Neruda, which is very strange, and I've never discovered quite what that's about. But that was where he got the name from. His father apparently knew this poet a little, as far as I got, but perhaps you know more about it than I do. So, it begins with my own experience of people, poverty-stricken people, sleeping in the streets of Bombay, which really upset me. I mean, it sounds ever so pompous, but it's unbearable, that kind of thing, to me. And then moves into areas of poverty in other countries, and the Chilean workers. And these poor people, the peasants, actually knew this man's poems and thought they was, that was part of their own culture. They didn't feel separated from it. I thought that was quite extraordinary. Okay, enough of all that. They rise against misery and the gods in this golden age of world poetry. New songs, hunted down. 1 million men sleep on the road outside Bombay, night after night. At whom do these everlasting stones smile on the blood-stained planet? Stone-folded tunic, a look lost in distance, inhuman human. Sculptors rebel against the canons of pain, crises in the guiding principles of capitalism. Asia left to tourists of the occult. His voice, water and nitrate in the furrows of our time-honored language. They threw everything into the mill. Enemy flag, a Moorish blood-stained tunic. The paper turned beautiful, a book, the pride from men who worked at poetry printing, carried the book instead of food and clothing. An endless column walks to exile bombed, books impassioned on the highway. From then on, my road meets every man's road from the south of solitude, to a people novel, mysterious shorelines, foam zoology. 4 machine guns trained on the platform as the police chief listened to the end. A Czech name to cover his first poems from his father, from a poet whose statue stands in Prague's Mala Strana quarter. In silent atmosphere, the Chilean workers and peasants listened to poems they requested by title. What more can a poet want? A nitrate miner, disfigured eyes, inflamed by terrible dust, his eyes shining, tells him, "I've known you for a long time, brother." Scorched features, their solitude and neglect. Not a light responsibility. Going from desert to mountain, the inhuman labor. Poems make it possible to walk and talk among them. White fertilizer and red mineral extracted from arid earth and rock. It takes sacrifices to transport water, nurse a plant to flower, raise a dog, a rabbit, a pig. Hidden territory. A leaf, centuries in humus. Our horses sink in green and white silence. The huge logs burnt in a room. Bodies of giant trees day and night. A thermal spring passed through the rooms. We plunged into volcanic waters, a hospitality. The miners removed blackened hats and helmets as the last speaker read in honor of Stalingrad. 10,000 hands. The unhappy writer, the crucified writer, are part of the ritual of happiness in the twilight of capitalism. A clear conscience and a restless intelligence, the investiture earned in the street, a guided spontaneity. His fleet of bottled ships with written names. Neruda collected bottled ships, I discovered. You know, they shut them in glass somehow. I don't know how they do it. His fleet of bottled ships with written names, stalking seashells in Oceania, Paris, Veracruz, blood the broken glass, old ships' figureheads after long journeys. In Che Guevara's diary, it stares out like a premonition. Your small dead body, like a brave captain's. He copied this from Canto para Bolivar. A poet who reads his poems to 130,000 people is not the same man and writes another way. An applause explosion in Brazil. Rebels love to be treated as defenders of principles by the bourgeois anti-fascists. A masked carnival before Franco's forces. In pouring rain, the presidential candidate read to copper miners, slum workers in the south wind. We were still the most popular people in the streets of potassium nitrate and copper, among the most victimized workers on the American continent, the Kennicott and Anaconda stranglehold. Shaken by the fire and darkness of his time, I lived the lives of others, of the poet who never recovered from the dazzling beetle of the evil hue, ocean swells coming into his life. To you alone, whose more refined spirits outwing these dull times and soar above the drudgeries of dirty intelligence. This poem is called Deer Hunt, and it does actually have a relationship to that film. I discovered later, I may say. But in actual fact, it wasn't planned that way. I want to just mention, in fact, the details of some of the stuff in it here. If I can find it. Yes, the reference here to 245T babes. This was a pollution that the Americans put in the Vietnamese rivers, so that even after they left, the nation would be killed off and polluted. It deals with that area of it's simply not an anti-American poem. It deals with all those ways in which human beings in the 20th century and before, of course, have behaved inhumanly to each other. It begins with a quotation from Gauguin, a great French painter. Civilization is sickness, barbarism, rejuvenation. Weeping dark in their seats, a nation feels purged. Guilt swallowed with popcorn for the John. They're Caucasian warriors in right camouflage. Kill subhumans again for money and the folk. Unction slobbers at each baby lips. The bamboo beds descend in booked history. In the block, humid auditorium, new patriotism sprouts, pink gills, the soot smell cellar. At their swivel hips, M16s rip into barbarians, forest victors. A redemptive forest movie against destroyed forests. No deer, nor birds. Where bomb deafness cuts the songs, and deformed 245T babes shoot out in dozens. Soldiered, fathered orphans sing, do not weep for those just born. The human being is evergreen. The deer hunter works his trail into metal forests, blood on New Jersey fenders, to get away from women, into the woods to talk dirty. Heavy rubber gloves wrench the jaws apart. Calipers on the buck's six-point rack. Gun smoke and liquor on the forest air. Bright orange clothes in a gasoline lantern. And a man speaks. My second blew one rear leg almost off, but he's still back up. The boys speak. Sitting in the car eating my lunch, this deer just walked right up to us. I just got out and shot him. The history of the wild boar's freedom is ours, if it is to be found in forests. What is shouted into the forest echoes back, throws its terror cry against crumbling ultimates of law. This is coming up to date now. This is, I hope not too long a poem. It was a letter which I never sent to, obviously not, there's no need because I know the guy quite well. He's one of our better British poets called Lee Harwood. And I spent a lot of time at sea, and he knew about this. He was always fascinated, he's always fascinated about my sea time career. I spent 4 years at sea, and he's always asking me about it. And so I thought, well, I'll write a letter to Lee telling him more than I dared tell him face to face about the fascination of being at sea and the dangers. It's called Letter to Lee Harwood, Sea Discoveries. There's a reference to the Greek god Dionysos, and one of whose signs was dolphins that leap in and out of water. They were sacred because they were part in air and part in the sea. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, the Coromandel coast is where I was for a time on the southeast of India, which is called Coromandel. That's where it is. That's where the islands are. Scupper Flow is in the Orkney Islands, right at the extreme north edge of Britain, where I also was for a time. I think that's about it. A looming story tracks a sea desire to be away from port, Hearthstone, even those islands we know since we refuse to be armed and pathetic, endlessly weary, closing at a touch. Landlessness in the lee shore contains the highest truth. Shoreless, indefinite, where we sport creation, watch Dionysos dolphins leap around the vine boat, whose helmsman leashes panthers below decks. A parody of finally back there or out there, absence for shipmates who embrace efficiently on deck and depart for their ships to trace and haul out the league in evil. The invasion from malice, from the woman who sniffs challenge to birth and mother primaries, to the man who must smash the hermit recluse, lovers cabined, who land for a brief informing day, a daily happy end, and the true sailor's converse. But mad heroes yell or glare from hunts, ships, and spacecraft, outwards, out to conquer inert calm, universal blackness, to bring ghastly light to the reflector moon in crazed fertility. We have seen the dusky body beneath, seen fidelity masked and disloyal advisors, wept, helpless, outraged, return to the ship. Have seen Zeus's vulture beak open, beating near, kicked in the balls, bound still, plotting theft and overthrow. Do you remain haunted by ill-conceived dreams of revenge? Dream helplessness and another's treachery off the Coromandel coast among dilettante islands, in stretched, sheen azure seas? Shark pirates, hospitable wild men with another language against the societies of darkness. Have we excluded ourselves from the urge to obey or compel in sailing away? Invited to farewell meetings, loving shipboard parties, to keep within an open region within which beings, with regard to what they are and how they are, can properly take their stand and become capable of being said. We have no deadly end. Do not dream vortex, draw down. Do not deepen into some frantic shoal, delirious throb, with adieu embodied dictates in a circus of guns. We watch for a breach when walled or break out before armed, masked men and women, semi-erect at bay and oncoming. The wonderful ships before our eyes, our bodies strained to, in love, obsessed by melting horizons, dawn after dawn. Of ice-cold ruck and crest at night plunging north, in the magnetic shaken memory of a manuscript found in a bottle from an extravagant uniformed seaman. We loathed what, quote, makes him tick, unquote, and people who use it. Look for counterbalance, gazing at the sea, remembering a naval instant and ancestors. I hung again and again in darkness over black shine waves to hook a gangway to the ship's hull, cold, oil-skinned, entering scupper flow lightless. Feared monsoon nights, lost ill in black deluge, adored sun-hot backs of giant crabs, gangling to slow lapping, and stood entranced at Atlantic Orkney edge for 12-foot waves to break 3 feet away on orange rock falls, seduced by risk, by love cries across barren wilderness, crouched in howling cold while the cruiser edged up a fjord between high-trained guns, turning crude dials for control, a mere transmitter for high explosive. You guessed most of this and dedicated your log with amused regard. It helped ever since to convert purgatory to self-regard. Do you fear death in a remote wild place which resembles where you have never been? Loathe spies, betrayal, tyranny, impotent agents for government and its opportunities? We have never believed we either rot or burn. More modest inside and against, more than a strategy for love and language creations. How day after day, unaltered sun plunged into the sea, shining thick with turbulent gestures and feeding blue jungle ozoned air, a perfect pitch unchanged. Original clarity, day after day, our absolute fitness, navigating surf-ringed islands, sharks bred in warm coral tanks, and an ape shook a treetop. A plunge opens that ocean, breath to swim, flight to lay, bronze on white sand, slope to ripple beat opened, and remember, this is no ecstatic, received as if, incorruptible. To come, and human miracles to come, not jostling in the street in a garbled society. We can know how behavior orients the pressures of selection, but cannot remain silent in knowledge of a huge, insolent wave that breaks on a windswept beach. And the last poem, I think, 110, will be this one. And this is a further kind of experiential thing, though I had great luck in being asked to stay on North American people's reservation in Arizona with the Hopi peoples. I won't go into the details of this, but it was the most extraordinary experience of living in a completely other culture. I was very affected by this indeed. And this is a kind of respect for those people I think you'll grasp, but a lot of the references are to that little bit of their culture that seemed to enter me, and I say that with absolute respect and honesty, because I don't think that, but the final words, you'll see what happened. It really changed my life. This is the record of visiting a highly sacred spot in this valley between two huge rock mesas, where there was an inscription on the wall that was painted into it and engraved into it of the history of these people, which I was taken to see. And all the way to this, I was instructed how to use everything we saw, like that plant, that root, that tree, everything had a use. It was astonishing. It's called talus, which is the name for the fall from mesas of ancient rocks. In cave overhang, hawk feathers, hail ice, from gold to blood, from olive to emerald, strata cool, 7, 8 degrees, still warm for snakes, baskers our hands, juniper resin in rain scents. Alert in the living, we came out to this trail, through rain-scalloped rock face, wind-cut run-off layers, leaping trail to place careful feet on, bend to as it leads, stop for your eyes, ears, pause, to measure spaces nothing renders. People made a way here, sat in the sand cave, on skin those earth kinds fended off prickles, burrs, a long walk to an edge under hawks, to inscribe some of their cosmos in sandstone. How the walk came, through firs and pinyons, wild rose petals in grease for a sore mouth, pinion gum to mend pottery, waterproof baskets, reeds chewed against venereal disease, gum smoke inhaled after death against sorcery, wheat lichen acids break stone and begin soil, powders for toothache, food of the war gods, holly grape leaves for rheumatism, dark red chokecherry in black cakes for winter, sagebrush drink for coughs from the Sipapu Canyon. They emerged from the earth, eagle, mountain sheep, parrot, horned toad, clans divided their travel, wandering under the lizard spirit, to their end guided by the Kachinas. Who influenced them away from this drift, this one story, above a semi-arid, wind-blown red soil? Green juniper berries, taste of gin for seasoning, green dye for wool from their leaves, for bows and fuel, bark for roofing, stuffed into sandals and pillows, then moved on out. From their edge, time, silence in the imagination. Men's hearts, as they reach writing, inscribes, I'm dead, beginning again. Thank you very much. Is that long enough?
So wouldn't
He's gone. Well,
he's gone.
well, he had now. Great. Thank you very much indeed. You get the film all right? Good, good. You get the... I forgot to turn my own.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway,
Good. Thanks a lot, everybody.
well, thank you very
I
much.
think that's about the right length, don't you? Yeah, that's enough. Okay. Thanks. So, Madam, Miss, yes.
My name is Nancy Duplessis.
Oh, wait a
I
minute.
had written to you.
That's right. You wrote me. Yes, yes.
My roommate in New York, Robert Saffer,
Oh,
was a
yes.
student
That's right.
of yours, and
Yes,
he
I
said,
did.
"Oh, you have to contact."
Yes, yes.
So now I live in Paris most of the time,
yes.
and I've stayed
How's
here
Rob?
and all that. He's doing fine. He's doing fine.
Did he realize ambitions like opening a restaurant?
He's not opening a restaurant. He's doing something like He's in charge of public relations or something for MCTV.
My God.
Yeah, he's really. So.
He was a very, very interesting student. I liked him a lot. And also, when I went to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, I was there. He was one of the people that really looked after me. But he was doing cookery.
Well, he's been through a lot of different.